Hello and welcome to the Herbs with Rosalee podcast. I'm your host, Rosalee de la Forêt. I'm very excited to share this episode with you. Today's guest shares a lot of wisdom, heritage, and a deep, obvious love for plants. Nina Lawrin is an ethnobotanist, urban forager, permaculture designer, artist, and folk herbalist. She is the owner of Lawrin Collections, an experience dedicated to education and reconnection to nature through everyday wild perennial foods with an emphasis in the Midwest, Eastern Europe, and Southern Africa. Her brand, Everyday Forage, provides wild perennial foods to Chicagoans and Michiganders through seasonal subscription boxes. Nina completed her master's degree in ethnobotany from the University of Kent in the UK. Her dissertation focus was on ecological knowledge retention of culturally salient food plants within Ukrainian immigrant communities in the US. Nina is a Fulbright alumna to Namibia and serves as a Fulbright alumni ambassador. She has worked alongside numerous farms and permaculture sites, including Ilolo Permaculture Initiative and Damaraland Farming Cooperative, cultivating their waste streams to share and create non-toxic, research-driven, site-specific artwork. She started her foraging journey learning from indigenous San community in Namibia and Botswana in 2016. Nina is a proud certified tree keeper with Open Lands number 1248, a certified permaculture designer, and just a general foodie at heart. Welcome to the Herbs with Rosalee podcast, Nina.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. And remind me where you're calling in from today.
So I'm actually calling in right now from Madeira Island in Portugal. And this year, despite the pandemic and a lot of very intense emotions and occurrences in the life, I found myself traveling more than I have in the last few years. And so I was actually doing some ancestral work in Europe, so in Ukraine, and then in Germany. And from there, I headed to Madeira, and I'll be back in the United States in a couple of days. So hence the sunburn here. The sun is quite intense here, but I'm calling in from Portugal right now, trying to work on my Portuguese.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah, you mentioned that the Atlantic Ocean was just out the way. So lovely. Well, I'm really excited to hear more from you about your story and how you got into your whole plant path and journey. You have so many interesting projects and interests in your background. So I want to hear more how that all happened for you.
Ooh, it's such a great question. I think it's a very long and winding road that in my mind I keep thinking it should be very direct and very simple of this was it. But I think a lot of folks growing up, being close to trees and to plants and to the water, it's been a place of comfort. It's been a place where I just always felt like I can be myself and show up. And as I grew older, I think I had certain expectations culturally and on myself as well that kind of took me away from the land and definitely brought me to cities and living a very convenient, in air quotes, lifestyle of grew up purchasing food and from the grocery stores, but I always had a curiosity and always just felt really good being near the forest. And I remember embarrassingly in high school, even those tests where you had to fill out everything you like, and they kind of guess or place you based on your personality, what was suited for you. And I remember I got a forester, and no one else got that. And I felt I should be a doctor, I should be a lawyer. And I grew up in this very small Ukrainian community and in the diaspora, so within Michigan is where I'm originally from. And I kept thinking, nope, I'm going to be something else. And through illness in my early 20s, I actually had to slow down and reassess how I was living my life. I have a background in visual art, and so after years of biology and really enjoying you know, I guess plants and animals, but also realizing this in university, this wasn't really where I was fitting in. I started pursuing an art career in painting, and I focused on oil painting. I love printmaking. I loved it all, the process of it, but it also my body couldn't take the fumes and the different materials I was using. And so in my early 20s, I got very ill, and a lot of specialists in the US, coming from a medical family as well. I got all the amazing hookups, but a lot of the specialists didn't really know what was going on with me. It was everything from carpal tunnel to Raynaud's to rheumatoid arthritis, and there was a whole cocktail of medications that folks offered me, and it just, in my gut, I knew that that wasn't the path I wanted to take. And while it was difficult to go against, both what my family thought was best for me, as well as professionals, I took a step back and just started assessing like how I was living and this very fast-paced life. I lived in Chicago then for about 12 years, and it was from that experience that I started changing things around. And I was very grateful and lucky to have done art restoration in Italy. And that was kind of like the first inkling of looking at pigments and looking at different like tempera, like historically how painters used the earth and plants within these work, and really like uncovering these like very old paintings and like building them back up. I was able to see, the fibers within canvas and the different pigmentation, and through there, I started working more with site-specific plants. So from the Midwest, and then I was very grateful to receive a Fulbright grant within the arts, and that allowed me to live in Namibia for about a year. And by chance encounter, I met with the Kwe San. And so these are Namibia's like quote unquote like hunter-gatherer communities that still have this intimacy with the land. And it was through meeting them that I really didn't know at the time how much this interaction would just change my life completely. And when I came back to the US, to Chicago, it was again this like disconnect and this sadness that started creeping in. And it again forced me to walk outside with our beautiful doggie, and she was taking me for walks more so than me taking her. And it was reassessing and looking at plants and really just taking the time to connect. And through that, it was just a deep dive in really focusing in on Midwestern plants and plant relationships and connection, and having extreme bouts of anxiety, being especially back in the United States more so than anywhere else, really, trying out different plants and different methods to help assist me to live within these spaces, and in turn wanting to share and create spaces so other people can also connect. And so it's been a very long, windy road. But yeah, that in a nutshell is kind of how I came through inspiration, through sharing of others, through illness, and through having like the courage to just slow down and really listen to what my body was saying and what my heart was saying, which oftentimes, I didn't always do. So.
That's a beautiful story of how the plants caught your attention. I see so much similarities in that. I was also sick in my early 20s, and I also went to doctors and was not really, they kind of didn't have a lot of solutions for me, but even the ones they had, I was like, yeah, that's not really me. So it's interesting that then, I just feel grateful, and I hear it in your words too, about finding the plants and finding another path and another way at a time when we really need it too. Yeah.
Definitely. And to this day too, I mean, through transforming my relationship to food, plants in that essence as well as like really detoxing my home environment. Like my hands now, I mean, they're okay, they're fine. That's where I felt the most pain, was through my hands up into my elbows. I couldn't move them, incredibly cold, and I'd wake up sobbing because like I couldn't even hold a cup of tea in the morning. And so everything from paraffin wax to try to stimulate the circulation. And and it was just toxic overload at the end. So
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing your story. And I'm really excited to talk about walnuts with you today. I have to say it's not a plant I have a lot of familiarity with beyond, the yummy nuts. So I'm excited to hear what you have to share with us.
yes. So walnut, walnut has a very personal, I guess, sharing and story in my life. And when thinking about a plant to be able to share with you all today, I I immediately was drawn to tree and tree medicine, and so I first thought maybe hawthorn and Tilia americana is just like my favorite too. Like I love all these tree medicines, and living in the urban space, oftentimes like trees are some of the most accessible plant connections that we can have because of like the filtration system itself. And so I think just naturally I was just more drawn to trees. And I initially thought hawthorn, but then I was in Ukraine, and so this whole year has been this ancestral lineage reconnection for me. And like I mentioned, I grew up in a small Ukrainian community. Three of my grandparents immigrated from Western Ukraine right after World War II, and they all have their own, really intense stories of how they came to the U.S. and being displaced people and refugees. And then my one grandma was from Germany, and my grandpa, so Walnut's really affiliated with my grandpa. And when I think about plant connection, I think that he's been like my huge inspiration at the time that I didn't really realize growing up that he was my main kind of focal point that had this relationship with plants. And so when we talk about the stories, like it's the hindsight where it's like, oh, my connection with my grandpa and his connection to walnut and his connection to the forest has been coming up more and more in my life, which has really been surprising. But so anyway, so he was from a village called Banya Bereznya in the Karpathy, in the mountains of Ukraine. And when I was making my way, I was in a main city called Ivano-Frankivsk. And I just remember like showing up in Ukraine and into this city area, and there was just all these walnuts everywhere. And it was that moment that it all made sense to me, all of the stories. So my grandpa immigrated, he would go back and forth when finances allowed him to be able to go back to his family and help support them in Ukraine. And I remember growing up, and he always had this big bowl of walnuts, like right there, like right when you walked in, on the side, like on a dresser, there was this big bowl of walnuts, and he had all these walnut trees. And I remember growing up, like being told that, like they're from Ukraine, and he actually brought these nuts over. And while I was in Ukraine, I realized, oh, because they're everywhere here, and it made me realize about like the cultural importance of the foods that we eat and the access to them, and this reminders of home, and even through immigration, how these culturally salient plants like come and move through us, and as we move throughout the world and we move throughout these different spaces. I know that there is some definite controversy around like invasive species as well, and native species, and bringing plants over and whatnot. But I do think that there is this very interesting notion that plants grow with us, and they transform, and even as our like climates are changing, like the benefits of having this variety, and really having this connection to plants through conservation and through remembrance, oftentimes through food. And so as my healing journey, a main portion of it was through food. It was really interesting that my grandpa, his main like plant species that he brought over was this walnut, and in turn he had this very interesting relationship to squirrels. And the battle, so it again becomes this entire like interconnection, outside of just like our human connection, but through plants and through animals, and like the very genuine and ingenuine methods that we're able to live with one another, and also like some of this like competing aspects with walnuts. And so in the Ukrainian tradition, for celebratory foods in Christmas time, as well as for weddings, there's this walnut torte. that we would always have. And so if you can imagine this very thin layer, it takes like 9-10 hours to make, very like laborious, beautiful creation of love, basically for celebratory foods, really for Christmas and for weddings. And it's this layered walnut with this almost like cream filling in the middle. So there's like these very thin layers and cream filling, and then this apricot jam in the middle, and then it's like covered in this like dark chocolate ganache. So it's like very decadent and delicious, and it comes only a few times a year. And we would have it yearly as a family. And oftentimes for me, the way that I associate plants is through like my everyday living. And while it's very accessible and easy to look through a book through different like herbal actions, and like, you can know all these different plants, how they're incorporated into one's life is what's really interesting for me personally, and how like plants show up in general in our lives. And so as we kind of talk a little bit more about like the fun medicinal properties of walnut itself, like I really enjoy echoing back into how this has affected my family and the people who are with these plants. And so so my grandpa, he had a tradition. He would always just have his bowl right, and he was so strong he could crack these nuts with his hands. Like he was insane. Yes, he was so strong, and he had a nut cracker too. But he would just sit there and crack it and pick out the meat of the nut. And the meat of the nut itself is high in omega-3. It's really great for brain health, cardiovascular health, for health in general. And in Ukraine, as like a general health, like people just kind of munch on nuts. Like I know in the States, I kind of like as I was growing up had a little bit more like trail nuts and stuff like this, which was interesting with like the M&Ms or something else. But in Ukraine, it was just primarily these nuts, and walnut is one of them. And I started doing some more research into this because walnut is not outside of these like very like traditional ways of consuming it during holidays. It hasn't been this like ongoing relationship with walnut. And so I did read that like there's recommendations of having like at least 3 pieces of the actual like nut itself daily soaked in water, and having it to be able to promote brain health as well as heart health. I took a deeper dive into more of the research, and there was actually some like studies in 2020 and one that just came out last year as well that I won't say proven, but they draw complete parallels to walnut and in consuming walnut to preventing Alzheimer's and to preventing like mild like cognitive deficiencies and stuff like this. And so something as simple that you could take for granted as walnut, of like, oh yeah, it's a nut, like whatever, like maybe we have it sometimes, like can be part of this medicine and this process. And echoing back, so my grandpa, he's always eating these nuts, and my grandma, who came from Germany, didn't have the same relationship to walnut. And my grandma, she ended up actually passing away from Alzheimer's, and she had diabetes as well. And so there's been more studies, which I'm happy to send you to if people are interested in the like a link below or something, if they're interested more in like the scientific data that link the benefits of consuming walnut to for diabetic health, for brain health, and for heart health. And for me, I was always just kind of like blown away that this plant has been there all along, and it's just that the practice of consuming, that was so different because of 2 different like cultural backgrounds. And I don't know, I felt very like humble too. Again, there's been time and time again that plants have come into my life where I didn't know that perhaps like I needed their support, but most definitely they were there. And then the more like soft I became, and the more like intuitive and like received a lot of their support, the healthier and healthier I became throughout this process. And so, just more reflective of how ironic it was that like perhaps my grandma could have received some support if that was part of her cultural foodway. And yeah, and it's just the irony in a lot of it. But walnut in general, the leaves, right? Like the smell of the leaves itself crushed is this like citrus kind of like smell, and that could be infused in oil as well and be able to be incorporated into salves. Walnut, I think, has a little bit more of this like stronger potency. It's not necessarily, maybe like a chamomile or something, but chamomile is also strong, but very specific, and so walnut is also very specific, and it wouldn't be something that I would necessarily use every day. But then I also felt challenged by that too, of like, why not use walnut as medicine and actually using the food daily to be able to support like brain health? And do I need to go into some sort of like exotic plant that's not necessarily growing bacopa or something like this, where I have walnut right here? So it's had me reflecting again as well of how can I also use it? So walnut itself, the leaves are antifungal, antibacterial, antimicrobial. It's great for athlete's foot. So you can imagine, right, just like infusing it into some oil and some salve and being able to, if you're working outside quite a lot and a little bit like in hiking boots and sweaty like I am most of the time, if there's any kind of fungal growth, they can be used for that. Another very ironic, very interesting synchronicity with walnut that has happened in my family as well has been while I was in Ukraine. I have a little niece. My sister has a daughter who's 2 years old, and oh, she's lovely. She's wonderful, and she loves animals, and she loves going to the petting zoo, and she loves the cows, and she calls them the moo-moos, and she's so excited. And I found out, like a little bit through the grapevine, through my other sister, that Eliana had ringworm, and it was from this interaction with these animals. And I spoke with my sister, and they were giving her a specific medication that I still would like to look into to see if there is some parallel between walnut and this particular medication. But this medication was giving her just really like gastrointestinal issues, and just she wasn't doing so well with it. And walnut came to mind again, and my family in Ukraine, I ended up finding distant family in Ukraine while I was there. They lent me some other medicinal books with Ukrainian remedies, and I was looking through there as well. And walnut's very heavily used in Ukraine as a food medicine, but also as more within like a salve, an oil, a tincture. And so what I found was interesting was that walnut, the hulls that could be steeped into some sort of like liquid or into an oil, can actually be used topically for ringworm. And shared it with my sister. It was already a little bit later in the process, so I can't report back to say if that worked or not. But it was also very interesting that, again, walnut has been popping up. And, a ringworm, I don't think it does not occur all the time, especially I think for folks living in urban US. But I found it very interesting that walnut again popped up and could be used in that capacity as well.
I
Yeah.
love so much of this, Nina. It's like the richness of the family connection and heritage, and then the medicine that comes from it. And I love how you spoke about the simplicity of the medicine too, eating 3 nuts a day,
Yeah.
and using things topically, and like so many plants, walnut has so many gifts. And like I really love, you said it so beautifully, not just the herbal actions, but for you, the family history and the connection there as well.
Yeah, and there's so many fun ways to use walnut as well. I mean, as from like a natural dye, whether it's a hair product or if it's through the art world as well. In the Midwest, it's also like used quite readily. I mean, indigenous communities have used walnut for so many, from fishing practices to, it has the roots itself has like jugulan in it, so it's this protective space for it to be able to grow. And so really looking at these different types of growing practices and how is that incorporated into our lives as medicine as well. But what I found interesting, so also in the Midwest, like in Michigan, so my grandpa was also very much wanting to be up in like Roscommon areas. There's these old growth pine forests, which I didn't really realize again echoes a lot of the Karpatha in Ukraine. And there's like ice cream. There's this like walnut ice cream that's just out of. Have you tried it before? Have you had it?
I feel like, well, I've had walnuts in ice cream, obviously, but I don't know, like it's just made of walnuts.
Yeah, it's this like churned walnut ice cream, that like, when this is the first time I actually revisited since I was a young child back to that area was last winter before leaving to finish my dissertation and finish my studies in the UK and then going to Ukraine and Germany. And it was cold out, so there wasn't any any of the ice cream available. But I'm curious when I go back to be able to try it. And there's just fun ways to be able to incorporate it, even as like someone who cannot have dairy, especially in the U.S. As like a thickener to different types of meals. It doesn't have to be as like straightforward as like here's the three halves you can consume in the morning, like your supplements, and just pop them in.
Mhm.
But you can if you want to. It could be very simple. But there's really beautiful and decadent ways that you can incorporate it as a food, and yeah, looking at plants as medicine, as food, I think is really really vital to kind of shifting the perspective of kind of this like one pill wonder kind of ordeal, and really having this like building practice with plants and looking at our health through food as well.
That's a beautiful way to put that, and it seems like the perfect segue into your recipe, which I know is gonna cause a lot of excitement, and the whole team here at Herbs with Rosalie has been discussing this recipe and how amazing it looks, so I am so excited to try it. I'm not really the cook in our house, so I printed off the recipe and gave it to my husband and said, "Anytime."
Excellent.
Uh, so yeah, let's talk about your recipe you're sharing with all of us.
Yes, it's a gluten-free and vegan walnut coffee kind of torte. Take on the Ukrainian torte. And when I kind of inserted the coffee aspect of it, I was finishing up my dissertation, so I think some of it is needing a little bit more of a stimulant. But the coffee can also be substituted with like an apricot preserves, which is really nice, and
Ooh.
also you can have like a coconut whipped kind of cream and stuff like that on top. So you have a little bit more of the genuine taste of this like Ukrainian Christmas torte. This is cheesecake, and so this is how I've been able to consume a lot of different tastes from home, from my lineage as well, that have a lot of gluten and dairy that I can't have because of illness. And yeah, it's just very simple to make. I've been making kind of these like vegan cheesecakes for some time now, and what better way to incorporate walnuts than into this like beautiful crust, and also incorporate some other nuts as well. Like, it is higher in fat, but I think for a dessert, I think it's really something special and something really delicious that can help your brain as well. And I try making it for my family once a time, sometimes in the summertime more so than anything, because I like eating them a little bit colder, so almost like an ice cream. But you can also have them during the holidays as well, and it's just a fun way to consume walnuts and yeah.
Well, I'm really excited to try it, and I appreciate that it's dairy-free. I happen to love dairy, but my husband doesn't digest it well, and he loves cheesecake, so I just have a feeling this is gonna be our new favorite recipe.
Oh, good. Yes, please let me know how you like it, because I've been making different variants of these cheesecakes, especially like in relation to like my like hormonal cycle as well. So oftentimes for like during my menstrual cycle, I'd make almost like a beet cheesecake like this, and I also really enjoyed that as well. And so it's kind of a fun base that you're able to layer in different aspects, and walnut is one of my favorite bases on the bottom layer. So I think it's a great way to consume a little sweetness.
It sounds absolutely wonderful. Well, for the listeners, as you probably know by now, I love to share recipes when we talk about these plants because recipes are really a wonderful way for you to get involved and create your own experience with herbs. Because, it's one thing to hear cool facts about walnuts or even hear Nina's beautiful family history about walnuts, but it's really an entirely other thing for you to form your own relationship with this plant through your own tasting, observing, and making fun treats. So what better way to do that than with Nina's recipe for raw vegan walnut and coffee cheesecake torte. Yum! This is a simpler twist on the traditional Ukrainian walnut torte, and it's gluten-free and dairy-free. You can download your recipe card using the link in the video description. And on that same page, you'll also find show notes, including direct links to Nina's offerings and a transcript for this interview. Okay, Nina, I hope we still have listeners with us and they're not all off making that recipe. I bet some are, but I'm looking forward to our continued conversation. And I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about this because one thing I love about herbalism and plants is that we all bring our creative and unique ways of working with plants. And I know you have a lot of cool projects going out on, and I'd love to hear, what's going on with you right now. What ways are you working with plants right now?
Yeah. So for the different projects and stuff, it's constantly ongoing and international projects running all the time. But for folks who are in the Midwest area, in particular in Chicago, as well as in Michigan, I'll be offering a couple of urban foraging courses so that there's a little bit more ease and identification. But for a course that I'm really actually excited about, it starts October 9th, is an online course that's open internationally, that's based around plant connection with specific emphasis on European ancestry and lineage. And so I'm really excited because I know that there's a couple of folks already joining from Namibia and from Ukraine and from Germany as well. And so being able to have folks in the US kind of joining on this conversation will be really lovely. And I think it's special for me to be able to host a space, to be able to offer these types of connections globally, even though we're all kind of sitting in our computers and in this one space. I think it's quite interesting to see this like interconnectedness. So we'll be covering 5 different plant families and 6 plants in general, and having a deep dive with each plant specifically. And there's going to be opportunity to be able to kind of unfold and uncover a lot of ancestral lineage, but also with like migration of the plant itself and how we can really like work with one another within the landscape that we are in, as well as with local and indigenous communities. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope that y'all can join us.
Yeah, it sounds really wonderful, impactful, and deep and rich, which is just something I keep getting from you. Can you share the plants in the course, or is that a surprise?
It's a little bit of a surprise. I'll be posting a little bit more of the families, but I'm curious though, because a lot of it is it's a base, but it's also kind of collaborative, because a lot of folks, like if we're looking, for instance, at Walnut, folks in Namibia have a totally different relationship to Walnut from their ancestry within Germany and within the Netherlands. And so while there will be a base, it's a very like fluid course where it will be a little bit more collaborative depending on who is with us. So
Wow, that sounds really fascinating. I like how you're saying like we're gonna like get together with people from all over to discuss, like what that means for all these different peoples in the world. So yeah, that sounds really wonderful. Thanks for sharing about that.
yes, of course.
Yeah. Well, the last question I have is one that I'm asking everyone in season 2. And the question is, what's something you've learned or experienced in your herbal journey that's surprised you?
Yeah, that's also a great question, Rosalee. Honestly, I never really knew how impactful plants in general would be in my life. I never knew how supported and fulfilled I would feel. Like I never anticipated that type of connection, and I think that my grandparents, for instance, I think that they already knew that was very normalized, because they grew up with these types of connections and with this type of relationship. And some of it was definitely due to economics and access. But I think for me, not growing up necessarily with the type of intimacy, I was just more so surprised with just how calm, and how much of a spiritual journey this has been for me. I never really intended it for it to feel so trusting and so fluid, and it was more very practical. Like, I'm sick, I don't feel well, what can I do? But like slowly it started growing, and it's really just been surprising me how many times in on this journey I've been asked to kind of take that leap and to trust, and being so scared doing so, but always, like, whether that's moving or traveling during a pandemic, always feeling this sense of like calm and connection, because there's a plant ally I that I remember, that I came across, that I introduced myself to, and that like there's this ongoing relationship, whether I'm in the Midwest or if I'm in Europe or if I'm in Namibia or Southern Africa. There's just this constant support, and it's probably like upon an essence of like what like an unconditional like love and relationship would feel like, that is mutually beneficial. But it's also like just seeing these plants, without knowing a certain language or anyone there, there's someone that I know. They became like friends, and they became friends, not even like friends, they became my friends, and I didn't expect that. As cliquey and bougie as that maybe sound, like I really just did not. I think that's been the most surprising like thing, is really acknowledging that they are beings in and of themselves, and that we are connected. So I think that's been my biggest and most impactful surprise.
I'm so glad you shared that experience. I've been thinking about this so much, like that exact same thing. And from my perspective as a teacher, and I have people come in and like their question is like, what herb is good for my headache? And
Yeah.
obviously, I mean, that's what motivates a lot of us. Like we have illnesses, we want to get better. So we want to know what herb is good for that thing, and how that's like such a like tiny, tiny little percentage of what herbs really can enliven in us and what they can bring to our life. And you've like everything you shared is really an example of that. It's not just like take walnuts for brain health. It's this familial connection. It's this wonderful food as medicine. It's heritage and it's friendship too. I thought about this just the other day too. I've been thinking a lot about language because I speak
Mhm.
French, Spanish, and I'm really studying French a lot right now and really working towards fluency. And I was thinking about how some people learn, like they go on a trip and they'll learn like how to ask for the toilets or like ask for change or the bill or, like they're learning like tourist phrases,
Yes.
and how like there's that level, which is kind of like the same level of like what herb is good for my headache or something like that. But when you learn another language, it's this whole like you become another person in order to learn that language. You learn so many things about culture, different phrases. It's like your brain rewires to understand other
Yes.
languages and the different ways of thinking. And anyway, that's kind of tangential, but I just, as you were speaking, I was like, wow, this is exactly what I've been thinking about. There's like the surface of this mechanical what do herbs do, or où sont les toilettes, where are the toilets, and then there's this that's just like the iceberg, I guess, and there's this incredible richness and fulfillment and that exists underneath, and not everyone gets there, but it's so exciting to see people like make that transition.
Yes, no, most definitely. And thank you for going on a mini tangent with me, because I've been tangenting this whole time. But like you said too, with language, like right, like it's a different language with the plant itself. But like for me, like it's also why, like in Portugal, I'm learning Portuguese as well, and in Namibia, pushing myself to not only learn German, for Germany, but it was a former colony of Germany, but to learn Ochiherero, Shivambo, Afrikaans, Kwedam, like different languages, because the more that we understand like the actual human language as well, it's a whole another realm and world to be able to connect with plants on that different level, and understand the relationship between communities and the plants. And so just as a side tangent, in Ukraine, there was like 3 or 4 different words for blueberry, and looking at culturally significant plants, and foodways, and like that's a huge indicator that like everyone knew like these, depending on wild or cultivated, and also, to go back to walnut, let me just, with even walnut itself, in Ukraine, like there's different words for how you make like vodka, right? So you have vodka, the very like with Russia and as well in Ukraine, but horilka is the walnut itself. It's in the hull is infused in the spirit. And so that gives it the taste and it gives it the medicinal properties and it makes it very specifically Ukrainian. And then there's yet another word that if you make it like a home brew, but it's very specific with walnut and and so it's very interesting that like, all these different languages and words for a very specific plant can really give indication of like the process of connection, of where it's harvested, how it's harvested, the time of year, and that's right now where kind of I'm at, is kind of like in this nuanced, being able to identify walnut, be able to have a relationship wherever I go with walnut, but then now it's like this very nuanced, very culturally specific usages, but language around the plant as well. And so I think that's just fascinating. I mean, 5 different languages, you inspire me. I hope I get there.
I love that when you're talking about the names, because I've heard this before. It's like the more names you have for someone, the more relationship that involves. I think of like my husband, like I rarely call him by his given name, but he has like 20 pet names, and that's kind of
Or when they're in
similar.
trouble or something, there's a specific name.
That can be his full name.
Yes,
Well, Nina,
yes.
thank you so much for joining us. You shared so much beautiful wisdom about walnuts and heritage, and even the plant-human relationship and how deep and fulfilling that can be. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Of course. Thank you so much. I really feel just honored and humbled to be here with you. So thank you.
Don't forget to click the link in the video description to get free access to Nina's raw vegan walnut and coffee cheesecake-torte. Also available are the complete show notes, including the transcript. You can also visit Nina directly at loverincollections.com. Before you go, be sure to click the subscribe button so that you'll be the first to get my new videos, including interviews like this. I'd also love to hear your thoughts about this interview and your relationship with walnuts. Leave your comments below. I deeply believe that this world needs more herbalists and more plant-centered folks like you. I'm so glad you're here as part of this herbal community. Have a beautiful day.